Good afternoon. So I'm excited to talk to you guys today, particularly about this subject. And it's actually kind of fitting that we're in a university because it's a place of great learning, first and foremost. But in terms of me coming in as a speaker, it's great because it informs me that you're here for one of probably two reasons. The first is probably because you or somebody in your family felt that you would get great value in terms of coming to college or university, knowing that you would be able to come here and you'd be able to provide for your family in the future. Or two, that by being associated or affiliated with this university, that doors would be open to you later in life, whether professionally, for your family, your kids, having a good structured life and upbringing by being affiliated with this university would certainly open doors for you. Now, I think that that's wonderful, at least from where I'm standing, because I know that each of you guys came in the door with the intent, at least, of being a part of the TED community and sitting here and learning from each of us as speakers. The positive thing about that is whether you're in India or abroad and you tell people that you were here today, that carries a certain association with it. It lets people know that not only have you participated in events with a highly skilled or highly informed audience, but that you aspire to know more about the world, which is a wonderful thing to be associated with. Now, outside of the university setting, each of us can probably attest to the fact that there are other associations that are very beneficial to us in life and in business. So I don't know if you guys want to show hands. I can barely see some of you guys because of the lighting, but how many of you can think of somebody or a professional or business person, YouTuber, that is really well known for being great in business, a great steward of money, somebody that builds consensus, can pull employees together for a unified front and make a profit? Okay. Now, beyond business, what about somebody that you can think of in your life that is known for being a great family person? And being associated with that family means that you have a higher elevated status. Maybe that family gets to go to really nice events. Maybe the family is connected to the government. Maybe the family is connected to a celebrity, or they get special treatment in some way where there's a benefit to being associated with them. And if you don't know a family or a business person, how about somebody who has an amazing house? We're in a college setting, so maybe somebody who's got the best dorm, somebody who has the best living quarters, where everybody wants to be a part of it because there's such an amazing opportunity to hang out, to see things that you wouldn't typically get to see, have foods or try things that you wouldn't typically have access to. That's the wonderful thing about associations. We know that when we're connected to them and to their networks, there's an obvious benefit to them. And unfortunately, when there's not one, perhaps we may think otherwise. Now, just as an example, how many of you can think of maybe somebody in your family, a parent, who has probably put a lot of pressure on you to become a great business person, have a great family, or even have an amazing house? By a show of hands? Wonderful. But if you think about it, how many of you guys sometimes don't like that extra pressure of being affiliated or having your parents tell you have to live up to a certain, I see those hands, live up to a certain standard? The thing is, though, whether or not we do live up to that standard and we feel that we can achieve it, there's still something that's in us that says, you know what, the fact that my family thinks that I can aspire to such greatness or such influence still makes me feel really good, even if it does come with a bit of pressure. Now, on the other hand, if we want to put the shoe on the other foot, let's think about the associations in life that don't particularly always draw in the best experiences by being affiliated with them. Perhaps you or somebody in your family has experienced homelessness, or you know somebody that's experienced homelessness. It's not something we regularly run out and tell people that we've gone through or that we know somebody that it's experiencing. Or what about mental illness, anxiety, depression, panic attacks? These aren't typically things that we think positively of when we're considering our associations. Or even poverty. Family members that have had hardship, that are poor, ourselves personally, if we've grown up very poor. These aren't the types of things that we race and tell people the same way that we would if we're affiliated or associated with a strong business person or somebody who owns an amazing house. And lastly, perhaps being associated or affiliated with somebody who's gone to jail or who's had problems with the legal system. These are all things that, unfortunately, hurt our ability to ascend in life. And it's very clear. We don't always talk about them, but the fact is, when we think about the positive things, we know that there's a benefit. But the negative things we don't typically talk about conversationally, know that there's a certain stigma attached to them. My name's Adonica Shaw, and I'm the founder of Wing Women. Wing Women is a social network for women facing ups and downs in their reproductive health. In addition to that, I'm a patient advocate. I work with women all over the world to help them reframe negative or somewhat even unique or taboo things that have happened to them in their life. And I help them to reframe what they have gone through in an effort to move them forward. Now, generally speaking, there are two different types of stigma. There's public stigma, which is what comes from the outside when you're going through something, whether or not you're a woman going through reproductive health issues. These are the things that we feel other people saying about us, the judgments that we carry by having had something happen in our lives that society or the public at large or at general is taking an account of and saying, I believe X, Y, Z of you because you did ABC, you did this. And for that reason, that is why I feel this way about you. And then there's self-stigma. The difference is that self-stigma are the stigmas and the beliefs and feelings that we have about ourselves and our own personal shame as a result of something we've personally gone through or somebody very close to us. For the sake of this conversation today, I want to focus on the self-stigma. A lot of my work, again, deals with discussing and working with patients directly in terms of understanding their self, their stigmas, and things that are happening within their body that, unfortunately, they may not have a lot of control over, and how to transcend them or overcome them if necessary. Now, in my work, I, again, speak to all types of people. People who've had mental health crises, other people that have experienced cancers, rare conditions. And in these conversations with people, there are about 4 different trends that come up quite frequently in terms of the types of things that they say are preventing them from getting beyond their stigma. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about them today because they come up quite frequently, and I don't know if you yourself have ever come into contact with somebody or personally experienced them. The first stigma that commonly comes up, or the first reasoning that people give me that they cannot overcome a stigma, is that their narrative is already pretty much determined by other people. Now, don't get me wrong, there are things that happen to us in society that are much beyond our control. But there's a fine line in which people saying things about us and us claiming agency changes that narrative. You see, when we step back and we say, oh, such and such said this about me, they're gossiping about me, they're gossiping about my family, it must be true. You have no control what those other people do, but you do have control in terms of your own agency in that situation and not giving away your power and not automatically agreeing simply because somebody has said something about you or your family. The second belief that commonly stops people from overcoming their stigma is the belief that they're always stuck with it. Now, when you think about being stuck in something, it feels unchangeable, something that you have no control over. And particularly when we're talking about health concerns, if there's something that you are diagnosed with and perhaps there is a cure or there is treatment, and in some cases I've spoken to people where there is no cure or treatment, there can be a lot of feelings that they have to work through in terms of how do I get beyond this if people have witnessed me struggle with this condition or with this disease. They struggle with knowing that, hey, I've gone through this and people have witnessed me struggle. They're never going to see me any differently. The thing I tell them here is that you always have the ability to focus on self. Again, you cannot control the people or the factors outside of you, but when you're the patient or when you're the person with the stigma, it is imperative that you understand and manage and regulate the ways in which you view and see yourself. The next thing that comes up very commonly when I'm talking to people about why they cannot overcome their stigma is that they are constantly needing or feeling as though they need to share their shame, pain, or their stigma story with others to be liked, to be accepted. Now, I'm an adult now, but I can only remember thinking back even in elementary and middle school, high school, I mean, honestly, even sometimes as an adult, everybody, has that need to want to belong. You want to feel as though you're part of the group and part of the crowd. And unfortunately, when you are stigmatized or you've been through something, you can have this desire to want to share and to exchange your story as a form of currency to be accepted into a social group. But unlike a rupee or a dollar, your shame, your stigma is not a currency. It doesn't have a set value where where you give it, you're getting something equal in return. And often in social situations, we exchange it, not receiving anything in return, which is actually quite unhealthy for the patient. And last, and this is a big one, a reason that people give me that they cannot overcome their stigma is because their friends and family have to get it. And if their friends and family don't understand their stigma, their diagnosis, their shame, their life experience, that they're not going to be anything. They'll never be anything unless their mom or their dad gets it. The thing is, though, whether or not you have a close family member or a friend that understands you, you're still responsible for moving on in life. Now, what happens over time is whether somebody who has experienced or is struggling with any one or all four of those stigmas or those beliefs around those stigmas and that shame associated with it, over time is that it can feel as though it's impossible to break through. It feels a lot like a pile of cords, a pile of things that we can't actually untangle, that we can't break through, that if we held the light up on the other side, probably wouldn't permeate so that we couldn't see what was going on. It looks insurmountable. But I'm here today to actually share a little bit about my story and about how I made cords and blankets and quilts of my life based off of threads of what looks to be mess. Now, I know today we're in India, but I'm actually visiting from the other side of the world. I'm from Southern California in the United States. Palm trees. That's what everybody thinks of when they think of California. They think of Hollywood. They think of movie stars. They think of the Hollywood stars on the sidewalk. And so for me at 17, growing up in Southern California, I was a SoCal kid. I regularly went to church. I was a student, of course. I was an athlete. And so I spent a lot of my days at track practice or hanging out with my core group of friends. At the time, the most exciting thing I can think of that I was spending my time on was figuring out what prom dress to wear, which is a formal dance in the United States that happens towards the end of high school, usually around 11th or 12th grade. And aside from that, looking into colleges, nothing super amazing happening, but in terms of being 17, figuring out college in a prom dress was at the top of my list. The thing is, within a course of maybe a few days before my 17th birthday, that changed. I went from being this very happy-go-lucky kid with the world in front of me to experiencing somewhat of a tragedy. And so my world changed. Maybe about 2 to 3 days within my birthday, I received a phone call from a family member who had informed me that my father passed away. Now, I didn't grow up in the household with my father, but I do know, or at least at the time, I knew that he was a Vietnam War veteran who at times struggled with mental health issues. But this particular phone call delivered a different type of news and made the conversation around his presence in my life, or at that point, his passing, far more complex. Because not only had he passed away as a Vietnam War vet and as somebody with severe mental health issues, but he died of a drug overdose. And so suddenly I went from this kid that had everything ahead of her to this girl that was seen as statistically unable or unlikely to become or achieve much in life. If you think about people who are associated or affiliated with heavy drug use, mental health issues, PTSD, you don't typically think of positive images of people. Those aren't usually the people in society we rush to be affiliated with. And so at 17, instead of thinking about which colleges I was going to and pursuing the magazines at the time to figure out what my dress was going to be about, my thoughts quickly shifted from what am I going to wear to prom to should I even go to prom now that everybody knows what happened to me? How do I get myself out of this deep, dark place? And so over the course of time, I didn't have an answer. I mean, honestly, I was just 17. I stopped talking for a while, which made matters worse because not only did everybody know what happened to my father, but then I was the girl who stopped talking because of what happened to my father. All while still going to school and trying to carry on what was the best I can make of a normal life as a child who had just learned that their parent had overdosed on a drug and died. Now, over time, honestly, I did what most 17-year-olds did, and quite frankly, if I'm being honest, whether you're 17 or 70, the behavior is still really similar. I compartmentalized it and packed it away because I thought to myself, well, that's not really my shame. That's not really my stigma because I wasn't the one who personally took that action. So why should I worry about stigmas if I'm able to go to school to overcome them, if I'm able to just shift and act as though they don't matter or they don't have any impact on my life? And I was doing a pretty good job until I was around 31. I was pregnant with my third child, and I'd had 2 previous, healthy pregnancies. And so third time around, I'm thinking, this is going to be easy. Because typically when people think about getting pregnant, you just assume the woman gets pregnant, she has a healthy pregnancy, boom, there's a baby, boom, happily ever after. That was not what happened during my pregnancy. At around 34 weeks, I swelled up and I started to get really lethargic. And I ended up in the emergency room one night because the nurses wanted to check my blood pressure. And so within a matter of hours, they came back and they said, you have a condition called preeclampsia. Preeclampsia disproportionately impacts women of color. For me, it meant that there was protein that they could find in urine samples, but then also an elevated blood pressure. And typically, to resolve this, they recommend that you deliver the baby. And so here I am, 31, not wanting to be the mom of a preemie, but when you have to make a life and death decision in terms of protecting the life of your baby, you do what's in the interest of the baby. So I delivered, thinking, okay, life is going to go back to normal. But unfortunately, within a few days, it didn't. My blood pressure readings worsened, and I experienced a code blue eclamptic crisis in the hospital. Now, for those of you who don't know what a code blue is, it's a hospital code that they call out to resuscitate somebody immediately or right before somebody passes. It's the last-ditch effort to get everybody in the hospital to one central area to save the life of the patient. And so, spoiler alert, I lived. I'm here with you today. But in the time that came about shortly after this, all of those feelings of guilt, shame, and stigma returned. You see, because unlike when I was 17 and the health concern or the crises that happened within my body around my health that impacted my kids and my family, this did impact me. Here I was looking down the road and looking and seeing, okay, what can I possibly do now if I found myself right back in the same place around my thoughts of stigma and shame that I hadn't reconciled? And so in that moment, I had to make a couple of really tough decisions. I had to decide whether or not I was going to disassociate myself from the stigma of my family or face it on head to head. Me versus me. My belief about myself versus my belief about myself. My belief about my family versus my belief about my family. You know, when we talk about stigmas and we talk about how they impact other people, It's a difficult conversation, but it's still easier to get through when you're able to provide advice for somebody else to follow, right? But what if it's you sitting in the hot seat, trying to figure out, how do I navigate this? Do I really want to pull apart the threads of my life to figure out just what a stigma is? How am I reacting to the stigma? What is my relationship to it? How are my actions perpetuating the stigma in my life? And what is it really going to take for me to overcome it? Well, I have to tell you, over many attempts and many tries to confront these thoughts and these feelings and a lot of interpersonal work, I came to learn four things about the stigmas that I had to overcome. And today I wanted to impart upon you, particularly if you find yourself stuck with a stigma or facing off with yourself in a sense, to figure out who you are, how to get out of it. How do you navigate through a stigma? The first way you navigate through a stigma is through self-allyship. Now, when we think of allies, we typically think of the people outside of ourselves that show up to help us in times of need. Or, and I don't know if anybody watches like Game of Thrones, but it's like you are the army and you're going into battle and you need some backup. And so somebody else comes around the corner right at the moment where you need them there. And they show up with the resources and money and the gold and the food and everything's all good. But when we're talking about self-allyship, the person that comes around the corner is you. The person that shows up in those times of need has to be yourself. And so when I talk about self-allyship, that means taking a hard look at the ways in which you can shift your story. You can shift your narrative by advocating for yourself and doing what's best for you, whether that's seeking support or help from other people, or even radically looking at some of your actions and looking at how they are feeding into the stigmas. The next thing I learned was the power of reframing. Now, reframing is something I think we generally knew about before the pandemic, but if I'm being honest, I feel like there have been far more conversations in the last 2 to 3 years around what reframing actually is and how it's beneficial, particularly when we're trying to conquer or discuss our behaviors in relationship to things that we've gone through and how do we get beyond them. And so for me, reframing was, this really terrible thing happened in the past, and there's nothing I can do about it. Just like today, the sun is out, there's clouds in the sky. It's always going to be that way. If we go and check the weather almanac reading in 5 years, that information's always going to be factual. What we do have control over, however, is the way that we perceive it. So for me, thinking about the things that happened with my father and his life, and my inability to reconcile at 17, I can say, man, that happened to me. I'm the child of an addict. I'm the child of somebody who died of an overdose. I'm the child of somebody who suffered from schizophrenia. Or I can reframe it and say, you know what? I am the child of somebody who suffered through these things and who passed away. But I have complete ability to reframe and shift my life using that information to push me forward instead of pulling me back. Reframing is giving yourself the opportunity to look at your situation from a different vantage point and look for the silver linings. I'm not saying that everything is going to be perfect once you come to the other side of your reframing processes, but it's certainly helpful, healthy, and beneficial to look at your life through the lens beyond judgment and removing yourself from an event that's happened, being able to observe it, call it, it is what it is, and then move on. The next thing that helped me to move beyond and overcome my stigmas was the importance of boundaries. Now, I'm a millennial, and it's funny because I feel like millennials and Gen Zers, we always get pegged as the ones who are kind of flighty and like, oh, I don't want to talk about that. Boundary, you just put up boundaries around things that you don't typically want to discuss. And to some people, it can look combative. But I think when used effectively, particularly when we're talking about stigma and shame, it can be incredibly beneficial in helping you to preserve yourself while you're trying to heal. And so I liken it to this. If you go to somebody's house, particularly somebody's house that has a gate around it, a gate is a boundary. The important thing about the gate, though, is that it tells you where you can enter, when you can enter, and if you can enter. Boundaries, particularly when we're talking about shame and stigma, are very similar. When you have people that are coming to you, you'll have to figure out, quite frankly, the fine line between people that are coming to you to understand your shame or your stigma from a place of compassion versus those that are showing up out of a place of curiosity. And knowing how to, when appropriately, put boundaries around the types of information you're willing to share, because it's not in your interest to share something with people who just doesn't have the ability to show up for you in the way that you need them to. So I learned that boundaries can be quite powerful, and so it helped me to stop feeling as though I needed to share that shame or that stigma to be liked, wanted, valued, and appreciated. That's something that I find to be actually quite beneficial that I talk to people about daily. And the last thing, particularly around the conversation around making sure or worrying about whether or not your friends and family are going to get it. I feel like for a while, any of us wants to make sure that those closest to us are right there in the trenches with us, particularly when something goes wrong. We want them to validate our fears. We want them to tell us it's going to be okay and that they understand where we're coming from. But from my experience, and I teach this in my work, you can't always guarantee that somebody is going to understand your pain, but that can't stop you from moving beyond it. The recommendation here and what I had to learn was that outrunning or trying to outrun a stigma didn't work. What I needed to do was find a sense of community with people that understood and were willing to sit with me in non-judgment. And so if you should find yourself labeled with a stigma or trying to work through one, the recommendation is to find a group of people that are willing to show up for you, that are not looking for you to exchange your pain for respect. You should go to places where the love is served, but quite frankly, only stay in the ones where the respect and the dignity are free. Now, if you're able to accomplish all of these things, I can assure you that the sun does come out again. There's a silver lining that comes up over the horizon for you. And, I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to say you're going to get this right on the first try. I certainly didn't. It took me a lot of attempts to confront myself, to face off with my deepest, darkest fears before I was able to get the hang of it. Being able to overcome something sometimes needs or requires that you have a certain muscle in place or a certain behavior or reflex action that pops up as soon as you start to even see the stigma trying to come back in. You teach yourself over time that you can overcome, and you come up with a rhythm or something that works for you. And if you're able to do these things, particularly when you find yourself in a low place, in addition to being able to overcome it, I would say that you'll be able to understand yourself and your humanity on a much deeper level and open greater pathways for health and healing. Thank you.